Welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Alex Wolfe and Gavin Schall here, and this is a special live mailbag that we're doing on YouTube. So if you're checking this out in pod form, next time come by. You can ask some questions live, but we're taking questions from Twitter as well, and we're gonna have a great time getting ready for the Knicks to be in the playoffs. Coming up right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. The championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Maybe the Knicks will be a championship team. Same with your vehicle. So for parts that fit, head to eBay Motors and look for the green check. Stay in the game with eBay Guaranteed Fit. ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. We want to thank you guys, too, for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us part of your daily routine. If you want to be one of our everydayers that listens every single day, you can be sure to hit the notification bell on YouTube or the auto download function on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. I'm Alex Wolfe. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site, The Strickland, which you can find strict.land. Lots of great playoff content on the strict.land this week if you want to check it out. And he is Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. And we've got some questions to answer from you guys. And of course, if you're tuning in on YouTube and want to ask us some questions, you could do so right in the comments and we'll be able to answer from there. But we solicited some from YouTube as well, or sorry, from Twitter as well, to make sure that we had some stuff to talk about here on the show. So first, from Rella1K on Twitter at Rella1K. 2021, Obi and Quickly both look surprisingly ready for the bright lights as rookies in the playoffs. Which Knicks do you predict will play above expectations this playoff series? Gavin, I'll throw that to you first.
Yeah, a couple different answers for this one. I don't know if this is above expectations because it's pretty much how he finished off the year, but I expect even if the latter is not in foul trouble, I expect Isaiah Hartenstein to close games over Mitchell Robinson. I think in the heat of the playoffs, you want a quick decision maker out there, and that is what Hartenstein brings to the table with his passing ability, his ability to get up defensively in the pick and roll while Mitch is going to play more in a drop. Hartenstein is going to be more at the level. And I think that's going to be essential late in games where you want to avoid Darius Garland or Donovan Mitchell just pouring in those late dagger threes. I think Hartenstein can help you find a couple of easy buckets offensively with his passing, with his diving to the rim. And while he's not quite the offensive rebounder Mitchell Robinson is, he's still one of the best in the NBA. So even if you're playing ISO and just trying to get one of your guys, whether it's Brunson, whether it's Randle, whether it's Quickly, just a one-on-one shot opportunity, Hartenstein could still be a real force on the glass against the Cavs team that struggles in that respect. I don't know if I expect RJ Barrett to play above expectations for the entirety of this series, but I think he has one monster game, 30-plus points, where he just looks unstoppable, going to the rim again and again and again. Over 10 free throws that game, hits 2 or 3 threes, shoots really well on twos. I think RJ wins the Knicks a game in this series. And I just think Quentin Grimes in general, again, maybe this is what people expect at this point, but I don't think the shooting post All-Star break from him was a mirage. I think he shoots over 38% on pretty high volume this series from three-point range. And in at least one game, that is the difference maker where he scores 20 and the Cavs just don't necessarily have the depth to match that kind of performance from a guy who's nominally the Knicks' 5th or 6th most important player.
Yeah, I'm going towards, I mean, I guess this question is all based off like what you consider to be above expectations, right? Like what are your expectations to begin with? I would say RJ comes to mind as a guy that could easily exceed expectations because I think that expectations are probably about the lowest they've been for him maybe in his whole career right now, based off the fact that he's been really struggling to shoot the ball, that prior to, him coming back from his like illness at the end of the season, he had kind of had a pretty subpar stretch of play overall. And he came back and, the shots still weren't falling, but his decision-making at least got better in those last number of games. And his, overall approach seemed better, even if the shots still weren't falling. So I think if he his approach is still good and then the shots start falling, like I think I said on one of our last shows last week, like he should just be shooting like a million jumpers and and try to get himself in rhythm before this series. If he's able to get those shots falling, then that changes things a lot for the Knicks because they really need, as much shooting help as they can get on the perimeter from him and from Quentin Grimes. Grimes is probably my other guy that I gravitate towards as far as a guy that I expect to really do well and like, but whose expectations maybe aren't as high, especially not among non-Knicks fans. I think that he's going to, like you said, continue really shooting well. Hopefully still just hits around like, even if it's like 38%, like I think he shot like 50% over his last like 10, 15 games or something from three, which is insane. If he even just shoots around like 38%, something like that, that's huge for the Knicks. And like, especially if Julius Randle is back, that they're going to go to Randle and Brunson a lot in isolation and try to exploit whatever they can with those two, because that's kind of the bread and butter is having those two isolate. So it's going to come down to like who can make those spot up shots out of RJ and Grimes, and hopefully it's both of them. But Grimes, I probably feel a little more confident having sort of a breakout performance than RJ. I think I'm with you with Hartenstein as well. I don't know if I necessarily see him closing over Mitchell Robinson all the time, but I definitely think that he's going to make an impact and probably will have to close one or two games just because of foul trouble. Because the Cavs, I think, are going to find ways to get inside and find ways to test Mitch and his restraint, I guess, around the rim, and how able he is to not foul these guys and instead just play good defense and keep them from scoring without hacking, which has been an issue. And honestly, it's just two really, really talented players in Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland. So I think that's going to open the door for Hartenstein to get a decent amount of minutes in some games. I'll just throw, honestly, Emmanuel Quickley out there too. I mean, he's a 6 man of the year finalist, but relative to what everybody apparently seems to think of what he's capable of off of the bench, based off all these weird 6 man of the year votes that are coming in with like, oh, well, he only does well in starts and he's not actually that good off the bench. Like, first off, that's wrong. But secondly, like, I think that he's going to come in with a chip on his shoulder too. He especially 2 years ago against the Hawks, I actually disagree with the initial premise of the question that Quickley looked ready for the playoffs a couple years ago. I think that he sort of had his struggles under the bright lights a couple years ago and kind of got taken out of the game in the playoffs and didn't really do much. I think he's going to come in with a chip on his shoulder and be like, look how much better I've gotten in 2 years, and really show out in at least one of these games and probably provide some defense that might keep him on the floor instead of like an RJ Barrett down the stretch of one or two of these games on either Garland or Mitchell, whoever he draws as an assignment.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. All right, let's go on to our next question from Jordan Bubb at Bub Jordan, who asked a ton of them. So it's going to be a common name for you guys. But he wants to know, do you think Tibbs does the same minutes rotations and substitution patterns as in the regular season for the first two games of the series? Will this be an advantage for the Cavs? I think what he's getting at there is basically like will the Knicks be predictable, and are there weak spots in the Knicks rotation that they can take advantage of, or will Tibbs, because Tibbs has this tendency to kind of max out his teams in the regular season, right? Because he's already playing his star guys 30, 40 minutes. He's already kind of cutting off the weak links and the guys that he doesn't think would be ready to play playoff type basketball. And it generally leads to his teams having these inflated regular season win totals, but then maybe underachieving slightly relative to the regular season success in the postseason. So I think that's what Jordan's getting at in terms of that being an advantage for the Cavs. And in terms of the answer to the actual question, I think there's kind of two different ways this can go in a scenario where Julius Randle's playing the first two games, or where Julius Randle's missing one or both of the first two games. So I think with Julius, it's going to be largely the same. I think the biggest shift comes with RJ Barrett. If he is struggling defensively, because he's going to be guarding Darius Garland in all likelihood to start the series, because you're going to want to park Jalen Brunson on Isaac Okoro and try and hide him there as much as you possibly can, keep him away from the action. So I think RJ gets to start on Garland. If Garland is just really torching RJ, if RJ doesn't quite have the foot speed to navigate screens, to stick with Garland when he's trying to pull up from deep, Garland is, I think in terms of percentage, the best shooter in the NBA from 26 feet and out, and is also lightning quick and is also a great interior passer. So there's a lot for RJ to contest. So if he gets stressed out on that end, or if RJ's not hitting shots and the Cavs basically treat him the same way the Knicks are planning on treating Isaac Okoro, Alex, RJ post-January was pretty much the worst three-point shooter in the NBA on open threes. I think Knicks Film School had the stat. They were something like 27%, or not they, RJ was something like 27% on open threes post-January, which is obviously horrific. If that continues into the playoffs, I could see a world where he is basically playing his shift in the first half, gets to run with the bench, and when after getting subbed out initially, and then in the second half, you just see RJ playing maybe just for an initial stint in the third quarter, or just with the bench in the third quarter, but then not again the rest of the game. I mean, to me, he's kind of the focal point of this type of question.
Yeah, I think so too. And also, I think there's something maybe to be said too for keeping an eye on Randle, and if he's truly 100% or not. Like, I could see Tibbs saying, I mean, because this is essentially how the Knicks look at players, right? We saw this with Brunson throughout the year more so than Randle, because Randle obviously had his Iron Man stretch of like basically the whole season where he didn't miss a single game until that sprained ankle. But Brunson dealt with little, nicks and bruises here and there, and would hit the floor, and then it would be like, okay, well, if you're healthy enough to get on the floor, you're healthy enough to play, period. And you're going to play like 35 minutes, and that's that, if not more. And I do worry a bit, like if Randle is not 100% and is playing like he's not 100%, and then Tibbs would still be like, well, but he's Julius Randle, and he's my, my big gun. So I got to keep him out there, and I got to give him his 35 minutes no matter what. I think now of all the times would finally be the time to be like, you know what, let's ease Julius in. Obi was playing so well to end the season. Let's actually like split their minutes almost down the middle, or do like 28 for Julius and 20 for Obi or something, just to give Julius a little more time off the floor to kind of rest and get himself right, with that ankle, because he's going to be coming in pretty cold. I guess we'll see. First, Julius has to even get okayed for game one. But, if that does happen and he gets okayed, you just got to keep an eye on whether he's himself or not. And if he's not be afraid to be like, you know what, let's go with something different. And like, look, Julius, this is no offense to you, but like, you're obviously not 100% right now, and we need to go with someone who is, because every game matters now. There's no getting readjusted. There's no throwaway games. It's all, you're live now. Like, this is it. Like, you gotta win these games or else you're toast. Luckily Tibbs kind of always goes in with that mentality, and always has the players with that mentality, but he also has a tendency to sort of ignore bad trends for a long period of time, especially in game. Like, he's not the best in-game adjuster. So if he comes into a game with the idea of Julius is going to play 35 minutes, he might just stick to that regardless. But I'm with you with RJ too. I think this question does, in the ideal of like a fully healthy Knicks and everything, this question is mostly in the scope of RJ Barrett, I feel like. And it, I think, comes down to like RJ versus Quickly. And I will say, if Tibbs does stick to like the quote unquote normal rotations and everything, it does at least bode well for the Knicks that he closed plenty of games with Emmanuel Quickly instead of RJ Barrett this year, and didn't seem super afraid to do that. So I think that's kind of where I lean, like the same minutes and rotations and everything else as the regular season. Yes, I do think that's going to be the case, especially for the first game. Hopefully we don't have any curveballs like in like 2 years ago, where Tibbs just all of a sudden decided after months, a whole season of Elfrid Payton not working, to be like, oh, well, now is the time to make a huge seismic change in the starting lineup.
I was okay with it that time, Alex.
It was fine, except for it was just like obvious that the Knicks hadn't prepared in that way the whole season. Then we're asked to do that on the fly in the playoffs. I don't see any huge seismic shifts like that coming, but I could see a world where, like, even though RJ is the guy that you want out there for like 30 minutes or whatever, him maybe getting like a couple games with like 20 something minutes, and Emmanuel Quickly and Quentin Grimes closing at the 2 and 3 spot to end certain games in the series. But Gavin, real quick before we continue on answering more questions, I do just have to let everybody know that today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. And for a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With the eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game. And when you shop on eBay Motors, with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. I just took advantage of this myself recently. I've got a 2020 Toyota Prius. I long on the highway. I decided to rip all my hubcaps off and instead put these little accents on the aluminum wheels underneath to make those pop a little bit. Shop for those on eBay Motors. Got them this past a right fit guarantee. So after all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, Gavin, we're back in, continuing talking through these questions. We got another one from Jordan Bubb here. So rank the top 5 players for the Knicks and Cavs in this series based on impact and importance to their team in the series. We got Donovan Mitchell, Julius Randle, Jalen Brunson, Darius Garland.
That was just my ranking, Alex, that I put in there.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah.
I thought that it was well. I thought those were just the players to choose from. Anyway, we got those. So go ahead. I just spoiled your answer.
Yeah. No, it's okay. It's okay. So you can pick. We can pick from anyone on both rosters. So I had in order impact and importance is interesting, right? Because I kind of think that's two different questions. Like impact is sort of like what I actually think is going to happen. Importance is all right. Who would swing the series the most if they perform disproportionately? But I took this more as impact. So I have Donovan Mitchell, number 1 most impactful player in this series. Julius Randle at second, and that's taking into account some of the importance factor. I don't know. I maybe you disagree with me, Alex, but I think Randle is maybe even more crucial than Brunson in this series, partially because I think Brunson is such a constant, but more so because of the emergence of Emmanuel Quickley, and that if Brunson is locked up to some extent by Isaac Okoro, I do think Emmanuel Quickley is at a point now where he can take a substantial amount of that slack and do so fairly efficiently. I think if Julius Randle isn't operating on all cylinders, there's just no way the Knicks can win this series. Partially because I think the spacing element at the 4 spot, obviously like Obi Toppin can give you a bit of that. But if we just assume that Julius is going to play big minutes, obviously Obi won't be on the floor, and you're going to need Julius to shoot the ball well. You're going to need him to out-physical Mobley and Allen, and that is both in terms of his ability to just be very meticulous around the basket, carving out spaces for layups and short fadeaways, but also just to join Mitchell Robinson and Isaiah Hartenstein in absolutely dominating the offensive glass. Some of my favorite sequences from Julius Randle this year have been when he just bullies teams and he gets 2, 3, 4 offensive rebounds in a row and then just pump fakes, shifts his hips around a little, and eventually dunks the basketball. And he's going to need to be that dude offensively and defensively, because that was an area where, like, the start of the season he wasn't very good. The last few weeks he played before he got hurt, I didn't think he was very good. In the middle, he played some great basketball on the defensive end, and he's going to have to play with that type of focus and his foot speed in space, switching onto Garland, switching onto Mitchell. I mean, to me, that's one of the more fascinating matchups to watch in the series. Is he conditioned well enough? Is his ankle healthy enough that he can move with those guys? Because I think we both know that Obi Toppin can't really move with those guys. So that's why I have Randle second over Brunson. And it's Garland and Mobley 4th and 5th. You can put those guys in any order you want. If Emmanuel Quickley by the end of this series, or Mitchell Robinson or Quentin Grimes, if we're talking about any of those guys jumping into the top 5 over one of those 2 Cavs players, I think that'll be a pretty good sign that the Knicks are winning or have won the series.
Yeah, so I think Donovan Mitchell is obviously number 1 as well. He's the best player in the series. Like, at his best, he's the best player in the series. I think as far as his just his scoring ability, every series is so crucial. He also is the guy with one of the most mercurial like playoff resumes of anybody, and I think for that reason, it's gonna make life harder for the Knicks if he brings his best self. But if he looks like he did like last year and could be game planned in the way that he was last year when the Jazz faced them, break because worst ever. Probably his worst playoffs ever, if we're being honest. So yeah, I think that Mitchell is number one because he's the most important and also has the highest probability to swing this series one way or the other. I feel like I also have Randle number two. It's so close between him and Brunson. I almost want to just like cop out and just make them a tie, because I think they're equally important, right? It's so important. Like if they're both on the floor, they're gonna have to play off of one another. There's gonna have to be an understanding of who's got it going and who doesn't in any given game. And I trust Brunson more to do that than I do Randle, because as you said, Randle does have his tendencies of sometimes getting a little too tunnel vision-y, of, sometimes those bad tendencies pop up more than you would like, from like last year's version of Julius Randle. And so if those things are popping up, that's probably why he is more important, because his mindset has to be 100% right, and he has to be ready to, like, if he's not feeling it coming back from injury, defer a little more, defer to Jalen Brunson more, use those double teams that he might draw and kick out to shooters more, things like that. So I think that's why I would put him a little higher. Brunson, then obviously just for his contributions alone, is the next best guy. And he honestly, by the end, we might say, oh, Brunson was the most important because he was just the best player in the series. Like, we literally saw this same movie play out last year, just with two totally different teams in a totally different conference, with Jalen Brunson and Donovan Mitchell, where they were facing off in the first round with the Jazz and the Mavs came out on top without Luka Doncic because Jalen Brunson was just that dominant in that matchup between those two guys. So Brunson definitely comes in next. And then I think I'm with you too with Garland and Mobley being next. The guy that I could see leapfrogging the most, maybe it's Emmanuel Quickly, but I think that Quentin Grimes has the highest potential to become a more he gets into a place where he could be like the swing factor, because he would be playing so well off of Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson, and he might pop off like 20 to 25 to 30 points in a couple games in the series and legitimately swing it for the Knicks. So I guess we'll see how that goes. But Gavin, before we move to any further questions here, do you want to just let anybody know where they might bet on some things for this playoff series for the Knicks? And then we'll get to a couple YouTube questions because we got a couple.
Yeah, Alex, there is only one place in the whole wide world for that, and it is FanDuel. Whether it's grand slams, no hitters, and double plays, they're all back, and there's no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's right. New customers can step up to the plate with a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, sign up, and place your first bet and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win. I know, Alex. I think I'm going to take. I know we're a couple games into the season now, but I am going to take the over on the Yankees. Just in terms of total wins on the year, they did an incredible job reloading their staff this offseason, and I think offensively there are some young pieces in the lineup, but I like what we're seeing from the mainstays so far. So I'm pretty optimistic about my Yanks. If you're with me, don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. And to your point, Alex, we've got us some YouTube questions. Opera Doc, Apura Doc. That's what I'm looking at. Apura Doc. Can Randle be less of an ISO player? And can we possibly move Barrett in the offseason package with picks to get a player who can really help us be a legitimate contender, especially since we currently don't have a draft pick? All right, so two separate questions there. The Julius Randle one, I think we can combine with one that we got from Jordan Bubb. He wanted to know basically like our our confidence level in how Julius is going to perform in this series, and whether he can. Oh, sorry. Actually, excuse me. This question from Zach at ZMP 323. One of the questions he asked us, on a 1 to 10 scale, how worried are we that Randle turns back into a pumpkin during this series like in 2021? So to combine those two questions, I would say I'm probably like a 7 out of 10, maybe an 8 out of 10. And to be clear, that isn't in terms of probability that I think it's going to happen. It's just in terms of how scared I actually am, just because the downside feels so high, where Julius tanking in that playoff series and then tanking the season after, that changed the trajectory of the Knicks as a franchise. And in turn, when he's gotten all of that together and more this year, it has brought the Knicks to a new level. And I have a new level of optimism. But Alex, if there's any bit of Randle's regular season performance that proves to be some amount of fool's gold, that is going to make for just a terrible offseason, right? I don't want another 3 months talking about if the Knicks need to trade Julius Randle. And I don't think that's going to happen. My more realistic concerns and less nightmarish concerns kind of center around just Randle's ability to handle double teams, and Cleveland getting really creative with how and where they send double teams, right? He had that 2-game stretch. It was against the Clippers, and it might not have been back-to-back games, but he also had one against the Heat where he absolutely looked like the Julius of that Hawks playoff series. And it was just two smart coaches, and Eric Spoelstra and Ty Lue, like two of the best guys who bring playoff type of game planning to the regular season, like sending guys at different angles from different platforms. And it really flustered Julius. And he has to strike that balance, right, of being unselfish, of making a quick pass, even if it doesn't lead to an assist, but also staying aggressive and still scoring over 20 points a game in this series. So I think it's kind of on how Randle handles that balance and his ability to process quickly that we've seen him struggle with at different points. But how big of a fear is that for you?
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you as far as worry level, like, not in terms of how likely I think, but just that if that happens, that basically means the Knicks are going to lose the series.
Right.
But I think so as it pertains to like Opera Doc's question with Randle being less of an ISO player, that doesn't necessarily bother me that much, because I don't think he needs to be less of an ISO player. I think he just needs to your point, work those double teams the best that he can. Because the reality of the situation is that the Knicks were the best, or one of the best ISO teams in the entire NBA this year. Like, they did it. They were like, I don't have the numbers from the final tallies of the season in front of me, but they were like in the top 5 of ISO possessions, and then in the top 5 of ISO points per possession, which means that they're doing something right with those possessions. Like, that's their bread and butter, for better or worse. Like, Jalen Brunson ISOs, Julius ISOs, sometimes you even get like an RJ or a Quickly ISO, but that's sort of like just how they create offense. And then they have that dominant offensive rebounding with Mitch and Hartenstein and Josh Hart and Julius Randle, even to a degree, waiting there to clean up misses if it happens. And that's just how they win. They generate a million possessions, just by ISOing, being ready for offensive rebounds, being ready to kick it out, whatever. But Julius at his best ISOs, and then if he starts cooking, switches gears and switches into distributor mode and starts finding shooters around the edge. And that's where he's at his best. So I don't necessarily want Julius to ISO less. I just want him to ISO right. And that's all that comes down to. As far as the second part of Opera Doc's question about, can the Knicks move Barrett in the offseason package with picks to get a player who can help be a legitimate contender, especially since no draft pick? I mean, first off, the no draft pick thing isn't guaranteed. The Knicks do still have like a 20% chance of securing the Dallas pick if one of the teams below Dallas jumps them. But I mean, if they find themselves in a position where Dallas does end up keeping their pick, that actually can sort of in a weird way work in the Knicks' favor, because then they have another pick in their future trove, because that pick just bounces 1 year at a time until 2025. And if the Mavericks are a lottery team or a top 10 team for 3 years in a row from this year through 2025, then it conveys as 2 second-round picks. So, they'll have a pretty substantial pick package they can still throw out this coming offseason. Can they? I mean, I don't know. That's such an off-season question. I don't know. I feel like I'm in playoff mode right now. What I'd really prefer right now is for RJ to play really well and solidify himself going into his new contract in this playoffs. But if it comes down to it, do I think that they can move RJ and some picks to get a player? Yeah, there's still enough latent upside in RJ Barrett that you can make him the centerpiece of a deal to some team. But you'd probably have to include a good chunk of draft picks, like 5 or 6 picks, to get like a legitimate bona fide megastar at this point.
Yeah, I think I don't think the Knicks are going to trade him if he really, really struggles in this series. I think they're maybe even more likely to trade him if he has like a few monster games and this regime just realizes, he's possibly not the best fit long term despite his talent. But if he plays terrible, is he even a positive value player on his current contract? Like, I still think there are rebuilding teams around the league, like your Charlottes, Detroit, like that. He's not really a great fit in Detroit, but maybe Charlotte is really the answer here. But I would just want to take a swing on his talent. But I think it would just be that, Alex. I think it would be a flyer because he hasn't shown a whole lot this year. And I know there are people out there that are RJ optimists. There are people out there who think he sucks and he's never going to be good. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? He's still a super young guy who's came inches away from averaging 20 points again this year. So he definitely has talent scoring the basketball. It's the other parts of his game. It's the efficiency with which he scores. But I do think there was legitimate progress in terms of the decision-making. I feel like, and the stats don't really back this up, but my gut instinct is that he got a little bit better defensively as the year went along. So I think there's a world where he's valuable to the Knicks or someone else. But if he sucks this series, like, you're gonna have a hard time convincing a team to even give up 1 first-round pick for him. So I don't think it's really the time for that. To get back to Zach, because we only got into some of his questions at ZMP323. The first one of his questions was, who is the Knicks X factor in this series? And maybe this will be slightly contradictory to what I just said, Alex, a couple minutes ago about Isaiah Hartenstein closing games, but I kind of think it's Mitchell Robinson because offensively, like, I think the tone of this series will be defined by not the Knicks out rebounding the Cavs, because that should be a given, right? The Knicks are the second best offensive rebounding team in the league. The Cavs have been the worst defensive rebounding team in the league post All-Star break. It's the margin by which they can do it. If the Knicks can emasculate and demoralize Cleveland by just getting every single offensive rebound, and by every single one, I mean, I don't know, something like 35% of them, I think that could swing this series. And I think what Mitch does at the rim, if he is at his apex, flying around, covering both the roller and the ball handler in P&R plays, and consistently contesting and deterring Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, lobs to Mobley, lobs to Allen, he can swing this series with his rim protection.
Yeah, I kind of think it's Mitch too. Without the obvious of Julius Randle, like, if he's healthy and he plays at his best, he's the X factor because his health is the big question mark right now. But I think it could be Mitch as well. I mean, it's like the age-old rivalry now that just keeps following these two guys around. Like, first it was with Mitch and Jared Allen in New York and Brooklyn, respectively. Now it's, Mitch in New York and Jared Allen in Cleveland. But, these guys have been kind of intrinsically linked for a while now, ever since, Allen was in Brooklyn. And I think Mitch will treat this as a big matchup because Mitch is very aware of Twitter discourse and stuff, and he knows that these two guys have been linked for a long time. If he goes out there and he really puts on a show with the offensive rebounding, that's going to be one of the biggest factors that the Knicks have going for them. Josh Hart also will be a huge X factor in that regard because he just is always flying around and just finds rebounds. He's like Dennis Rodman in that way, sort of like, where he just kind of always knows where the ball is going to go from the second that it hits the rim, and always finds himself in that right place to snatch a rebound out of a bigger guy's hand and create another possession out of it. Or in the case of a defensive rebound, start a transition, which most guys that are prolific rebounders are not grabbing the rebound and getting out and running immediately in transition, which is what makes Hart such a useful and game-busting player like that. So I think it's Mitch, and I think it's Josh Hart, and I think it's because of the rebounding. Like, this is just such a uniquely one-sided matchup in the rebounding department for the Knicks that if they don't take advantage of that, then they're going to have a tough time, because that's where you're going to have to beat the Cavs in this series, is second chance opportunities and, rebounding and pushing on the break, because the Cavs don't like to play fast. They like to play a slow setup version of offense, and they don't love to be running in transition all the time. So, I think that's going to be one of the biggest keys for the Knicks, and thus the X factor would be the top rebounders. Last part of Zach's question off Twitter. How do you think differences in depth affect the outcome of this series? This is a pretty good one, because the Cavs are kind of a top heavy team. They've got these four guys in the starting lineup, in Garland, Mitchell, Mobley, and Allen, that are like all stars, or guys that you could view being future all stars, or what have you. Like, all four of those guys are really fantastic. Okoro is a really good defender, but clearly has his struggles on offense. And then their bench, like, kind of leaves a lot to be desired, especially compared to the Knicks, who have kind of made the bench their focal point. Like, the bench is what wins the Knicks a lot of games this year. So how do you think the depth is going to play out, Gavin?
I mean, I think it's an area similar to the offensive glass, right? I mean, you look at a playoff series, particularly like one that's expected to be very competitive. It's all about these different battlegrounds. I mean, the Knicks, can they dominate offensive rebounds? Can the Cavs dominate with their deep shooting and their rim pressure? For the Knicks, one of those key battlegrounds is the bench, and that's an area where you need to see those bench margins 20 to 25 points in favor of the Knicks. And if the Cavs have guys like Karis LeVert and Dean Wade really start cooking from three, it can absolutely swing this series. But I think I'm so fascinated to see how Immanuel quickly performs this week. I mean, listening to, I'm sure, Alex, you're like me, I've listened to a million podcasts, like rewatching clips, rewatching games that they played earlier this season. And when I like hear the discourse, I really don't hear quickly brought up all that often, considering that he was probably the Knicks' best player for the last 20 games or so of the season. And granted, a big part of that, right, was Jalen Brunson was hurt for a lot of that period and then sat out the last few games. Julius Randle was hurt for the final 6 games, but quickly was incredible to finish up this year. And granted, as Celtics fans would tell you, maybe he's essentially like a 6th starter for the Knicks in this series. But if he can go out and just dominate the minutes that he's asked to play, that could swing things. I think Josh Hart's ability to guard Donovan Mitchell, which we saw in their last game against Cleveland, and get live steals, get transition layups, that could swing things for the Knicks. Isaiah Hartenstein's passing that hit another level for the Knicks, and like his ability to defend in space are big deals. And then Obi Toppin, who, I mean, might ultimately end up starting this series, but if he doesn't, if he's coming off the bench, can the confidence that he gained from putting up 21 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists on basically 50, 40, 90 splits to end the regular season, can that translate to lower volume on the bench? Is he still shooting threes with the same type of confidence, knowing that if he misses a couple in a row, instead of getting to play consequence-free basketball against the Indiana Pacers in Game 82, can he play as freely? Can he shoot it as well against the number 1 defense in basketball with the Knicks season on the line? So all those questions are relevant, but I think if everything's clicking for the Knicks with their bench, even if Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, all those guys are really cooking, like the Knicks will still have an opportunity to win this series.
Yeah, and I think one of the best things that the Knicks have going for them with that depth versus what the Cavs have is that if the Cavs, like, so you just said, even if all those guys are cooking, then, the Cavs might still be in trouble. If one of those guys is off, like if Donovan Mitchell is having a bad game, the options are not really there for the Cavs to absorb that. Whereas with the Knicks, I think the benefit of their depth is that they have so many guys sitting on their bench that I think could realistically start on a number of NBA teams. Like Immanuel Quickley could definitely start on a lot of NBA teams. Josh Hart already was starting on an NBA team this year before he came to the Knicks and has been a starting caliber player for years now. Hartenstein, I think, outside of his own foul issues, is a starting caliber player. Obi Toppin, looks at times the part of a starting caliber player as well. I mean, they just have so much depth off the bench that is good enough to close a game if they're really cooking and can absorb, say, RJ Barrett going out and he's like 0 for 6 from 3. And it's like, crap, we can't really keep this guy on the floor right now. Okay, no problem. You have Immanuel Quickley and Josh Hart like ready to go right now to come in and absorb not having one of your starters having a good game. Same thing goes for like if Quentin Grimes is off, which he's been off at different times this season, and we've seen Hart kind of take his minutes and take his role down the stretch. It might not even be that one of those guys is off necessarily, but just the one of these bench players are cooking so much off the bench that you kind of have to close the game with them, which are good problems to have. Like this is what has kind of buoyed the Knicks and buoyed them through that win streak and this hot close to the season was like they just have depth like few teams in the NBA right now have, and they're able to put out lineups, like different lineups. And Tibbs, to his credit, has been willing to experiment. Kind of goes back to the question we got asked earlier about is Tibbs going to stick to his same, rotation guns? His same rotation guns have not been the same this year that they were in past years. Like normally he kind of had his set idea, almost like I've always referenced it to like what they used to always say about like Mike Shanahan in football, where he had the first 20 plays of every game on offense mapped out. He did not deviate from them at all. Like you had to stick to the game script. That was it. And that used to be what Tibbs's MO was. Now Tibbs seems more willing to take chances and keep hot guys out there down the stretch, even if it goes against what he thought the closing lineup was going to be initially. So we might see some kind of weird lineups in this series, but I have pretty good faith at this point that the guys that are getting playing time at this point, Tibbs trusts all of them, except for maybe Obi Toppin. He's maybe the last guy that I could think of that hasn't really I guess in Tibbs's mind earned the right to potentially close a game over like Julius Randle.
Yeah.
No matter how Randle is playing, but we've even seen like Jalen Brunson sit down the stretch of a couple of key games. If Emmanuel Quickley and Quentin Grimes and Josh Hart are cooking together or whatever, like Brunson has sat before. So I think that's where the Knicks depth comes in, is that they just have so many more. It's like having more opportunities to throw something at the wall in any given game and see what sticks. Like the Cavs have 4 things to throw at the wall. And if they don't stick, then they don't have anything waiting, whereas the Knicks can throw 8 things at the wall and hope that 4 stick. You know what I mean? And that's just the difference between the two, I think, to me, and what could potentially be the difference with the depth there.
Yeah, I'm with you too. I wonder if we're underestimating Karis LeVert and his ability to swing a game in this series, because to me, I look at him very similarly to RJ Barrett. I mean, granted, he shot the ball a little bit better, but two guys who like to do a lot of the same things, right? Get to the rim, very slithery, decent mid-range game for LeVert too. Also kind of a questionable defender. And to me, this is kind of a different question, but I'm curious the balance Cleveland tries to strike between having Isaac Okoro just in there almost no matter how he's shooting, because of how well he did against Jalen Brunson. The one game this year, I keep referencing the stat, Alex, that he really guarded Jalen. Jalen was 5 for 12 or 5 for 13 from the floor, 14 points, 0 for 6 from 2-point range with Isaac Okoro guarding him. So that could swing things, but only if the Cavs say, all right, like we can't keep playing like this because they're just throwing 2 on Donovan Mitchell and Isaac Okoro's 1 for 9 from 3. We got to put Karis LeVert out there. And then it's like, all right, Karis LeVert going to give you more offense, but can Jalen Brunson just pick him out of a crowd and get layups after or mid-range jumpers on him over and over and over and over again? Alex, you want to go rapid fire, finish this up? Was there like 1 or 2 final questions that really stood out to you that you wanted to give your thoughts on?
Yeah, so first off, we have a couple that just came in through YouTube comments, so we'll just answer these real quick. First one, Ryan O'Sullivan, how much do you think Barrett can decide the series? I don't think anyone's expecting anything from him, but if he can hit threes, get into a role and average 20, he could be a big swing for the Knicks. I'm right there with Ryan. I think we sort of said that earlier. Yeah, if RJ can keep his process good, I think he showed even in a couple of those games when he came back from being sick that even if the threes aren't falling, as long as he's making good decisions and getting inside, finishing inside, and getting to the line that way, he could shoot like. I think we were just begging for like him to shoot like, oh man, instead of 0 for 7, can you just shoot like 2 for 7? Because then literally this would have been a phenomenal game instead of like barely breaking even. So I think that RJ can definitely dictate a lot in this series. But I think we could probably, for our final question here, Gavin, just for a nice note to end on, I think Blood of DePanta wants to know, what are y'all excited for this playoff series?
Oh yeah, what a lovely question. So I think we forget sometimes, right? Like as Nick said, we haven't been here in a long time, right? It's stressful and it's fun to break down the strategic minutia, but also we gotta appreciate the moment, right? Because what is it, like the fifth time in the last 23 years that we have a first round? No, it's been more than that because Melo made it a bunch. I don't know, maybe the seventh or eighth time in the last 8 years, but I'm going to say the first time since obviously 2 years ago, and then since 12-13 that we're going into a playoff series and we feel like we have an actual chance to win it. So I'm excited just for the stakes, right? That feeling of like, all right, like especially like, even if we somehow get out of the first round, it's not a sure thing that the Knicks would lose in the second round. They played the Celtics super well this year, so the Knicks would definitely have a chance. Or I guess sorry, it would be the Bucks. Yeah, that's going to be trouble. But I think I'm excited just to see how much of what we saw in the regular season was real, because I think last time around we kind of got crushed, right? And I'm not just talking about in the play on the court, but emotionally crushed by having this incredible season and finding out, all right, maybe the most sustainable part of it was 33-year-old Derrick Rose, who it turned out that was probably the last really high level basketball of his career. And this year, I think we're both a lot more confident that Jalen Brunson is real, and he's already shown that he can dominate a Donovan Mitchell-led team in the playoffs. I think we're much more confident that Julius Randle's process is sustainable, that Emmanuel Quickley's on a star trajectory, maybe Quentin Grimes is on a star trajectory, maybe RJ Barrett surprises us, and he has a really consistent, really impactful series. Maybe Mitchell Robinson still has another level to go, because remember, he didn't get to play last time around against Atlanta. Maybe someone off the Knicks bench, Josh Hart, and Obi Toppin plays well above their head. I think it is just that unknown, and that platform. I mean, that's the greatness of NBA playoff basketball, right? It's a platform for greatness, and it's a platform for guys to elevate their status in the league and also just in the minds of their fans. So I think it's just that opportunity, Alex, for us to get a more accurate gauge of conversations that are typically only hypothetical over like, all right, which of these guys are kind of like trench warfare guys, right? You want them in your bunker in the biggest moments. And two, how does it project for their future? Because a lot of times when you get breakouts, they start in the playoffs and that confidence translates to the next regular season.
Yeah, I think if I would boil down what I'm most excited for in this playoff series, it's sort of akin to what you said. I'm just excited for the fact that this time around it feels like this team feels less fluky than 2020 to 21, and therefore this feels like it's a building block appearance in the playoffs. Like, I don't think the Knicks are gonna make the finals or something this year. Maybe they'll surprise us. I don't know. But, I don't think I don't even have, like, in my wildest dreams, like Eastern Conference finals on my mind. But I feel like there's a real chance that they might make the second round this year. I really, if nothing else, that they might push the Cavs to like 6 or 7 games and, push this team that was a top 8 offense and number 1 defense to the brink, which is really saying something. Like the Cavs were very good during the regular season this year and should be a really good team as well with the way that they play basketball. So like, this just feels sustainable, and that's why it's more exciting. Like, back 2 years ago, you and I were obviously excited and talked ourselves into the team being better than it was, but it always felt, like you said, you knew that like it was like, okay, Derrick Rose was like one of the main reasons that this team played so well down the stretch. Like, there's some promising rookies and stuff, and that looks good, but like a lot of what made that team great was like playing around a guy who was playing a sort of unsustainable brand of basketball in Julius Randle too. And that's not great either. Like, you don't want to hitch your wagon to something that feels unsustainable, and this time around, Jalen Brunson, everything that he does just feels super sustainable. They're growing with these young players, this like great young core that they have. Julius seems to have turned himself around, and you have a couple players entering their prime in Brunson and Julius, but also a ton of guys that seem like they've barely scratched the surface in like Quickley and Grimes and even Mitch to a degree. Deuce McBride like looks super promising and like barely gets playing time. Like, there's just so much to be excited about with this team. I think that's what's exciting about these playoffs. That basically the Knicks, I feel like, can almost do no wrong in this playoffs, because as long as they don't come out and look completely out of their depth, they're gonna they're going to win over the fans, and they're going to win over probably the league. If they even just give the Cavs a series that shows, okay, well, this team wasn't even supposed to be here this year, and yet they just gave the Cavs, a team that did what the Knicks didn't do and sent out a ton of assets and everything to get Donovan Mitchell to try to compete this year. The Knicks did the bare minimum, as far as like they signed Jalen Brunson and just kind of kept their team together and coached their team well and put together a nice roster, made a nice little, role player addition of Josh Hart in the middle of the season. They just kind of did like the bare minimum to get here, and yet still were able to produce this much. That's going to look so good to other players that might finally be thinking about taking that leap and being like, you know what, I want to be that final piece for the Knicks. And I want to request to like be traded there, or I want to sign there in free agency or whatever. Like this postseason, short of getting like swept or something, no matter what, is going to put the Knicks on the map, and that's all we can ask for.
Yeah, it's kind of a low bar, right? You just obviously I care if the Knicks win or not. I desperately want the Knicks to win this series, but they just have to show up. They have to be the team they were in the regular season. And Cleveland is I don't think people appreciate how good the Cavs are, right? They're one of 3 teams in the NBA top 10 in offense or defense on a per possession basis. They're the second best team in the NBA. They get blown out less than any other team in basketball. I think the Knicks are second in that category. They blow teams out as much as almost anyone in basketball. Like this is the statistical profile of a team that you would typically see as a 2 seed, right? Not a 4 seed. They're really good. If the Knicks take them to the brink, I'm not going to say I'm happy with that because it's 0-0 right now. I want the Knicks to win this series. I think if Julius Randle is healthy, the Knicks totally can win this series. But Cleveland is more talented. Cleveland's a team that already made their all-in move, right? They traded the picks. They traded a guy who wasn't a young star, but turned out to be a young star in Lowry Market, and one that they thought was going to be a young star in Colin Sexton. The Knicks haven't done that yet. So this is a Knicks team playing with house money to some extent. So as long as, to your point, Alex, I completely agree. As long as they don't totally flop, this series is a success. And you just want to see one or multiple of those young guys, whether it's Quickly, RJ, Grimes, or Obi Toppin, like play at or above expectations. And if they play above expectations, like we're going to have a fun summer talking about what this team can be next year.
Yep, for sure. But all right. I think we're ready to wrap this one up. We'll of course be back later too. I think we're going to go live at some point after the game later too. Maybe we'll wait out our contemporaries at Knicks Fan TV and Knicks Film School, and then go on.
I don't know if we can do that, Alex. We're going like 4 a.m.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Maybe we'll see what we can do. But what we're thinking about probably going live later as well. So those of you that joined us on YouTube, appreciate you coming in and sitting with us and hanging out and asking questions. And we'll get ready for this Knicks playoff series, and hopefully they win game 1 tonight and can start things off on a really, really high note by capturing game 1 on the road. But we'll see how it all goes. But until later, thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you guys all soon. Peace out.